2026 does not begin as an ordinary year. It emerges as a point of definition, a time when that which was sustained by appearance, speech, or illusion no longer finds space to remain. It is not about fear nor sensationalism. It is about revelation. And every revelation demands positioning. For a long time, truths were delayed, covered up, or softened to keep structures standing. People learned to survive behind masks, adjusting words and behaviors to fit in. But there comes a moment when time itself becomes a filter. What is real remains. What is false is exposed. This is the scenario of 2026, a year in which illusions naturally dissolve. Not because someone decides to attack, but because incoherence becomes too visible to remain hidden. The truth no longer needs to be defended, it simply emerges. And that changes everything. The chosen recognize this time because they have already gone through internal processes of revelation. Before the world was confronted, they were. Before the external masks fell, their own had already been removed. Pain, silence, losses, and deep adjustments were part of that preparation. The divine verdict is not a public announcement, nor a theatrical judgment. It manifests through alignment. Each person begins to occupy the place that corresponds to what they truly sustain in their heart. And it is in this scenario that the chosen assume their destiny, not out of exaltation, but out of responsibility. My name is George, and this channel exists to speak clearly about this time, without exaggeration and without illusions. Here the focus is consciousness, truth, and spiritual discernment. Follow the channel to continue on this journey, because 2026 is not a year for distraction. It is a year of revelation. 2026 marks a point where time ceases to be just passage and becomes a response. Nothing arises suddenly. Everything that manifests now has been slowly built, in silence, over years. What changes is that there will no longer be room for postponements. Time begins to demand coherence. For a long time, it was possible to sustain speeches disconnected from practice. It was possible to maintain appearances, justify incoherences, and push internal adjustments to later. In 2026, that later ceases to exist. What has not been resolved now demands immediate positioning. That is why this year is called the Year of Revelation. Not because secrets will be exposed in a spectacular way, but because truth will become evident. Attitudes will speak louder than words. Postures will reveal intentions. Each person's own journey will show who they are, without the need for external judgment. The divine verdict does not appear as visible punishment. It manifests as a natural consequence. Those who lived in illusion will feel instability. Those who lived in truth will feel firmness. It's not about who made more mistakes or got more right, but about who chose to live aligned with what they already knew. The chosen recognize this movement because they have already felt this weight before. They went through periods where nothing made sense, where relationships fell apart, where silence was the only answer. That was not abandonment, it was preparation. While many were still trying to keep the old functioning, the chosen were being adjusted from within. In 2026, the world enters a process of gradual exposure. Systems based on appearance lose strength. Leaderships sustained by image go into crisis. Relationships built only out of convenience dissolve, not by direct attack, but because they can no longer hold. This process is uncomfortable because it removes the comfort of superficiality. It forces everyone to ask themselves who they really are, what they really sustain, and where they are really going. Time ceases to be neutral. It begins to respond directly to what each person has built internally. For the chosen, this is not a surprise. They have already understood that awakening is not an emotional event, but a change in posture. They already understand that living aligned requires renunciation, silence, and responsibility. That's why when 2026 begins, they don't panic. They recognize the scenario. The year of revelation does not destroy everything. It separates. It separates what is solid from what is fragile. It separates what is true from what is sustained by appearance. And this separation does not happen by external force, but by lack of foundation in what is not real. 2026 is the year in which time begins to respond clearly. And only those who have already learned to hear that response can walk without confusion. The masks do not fall all at once. They wear out. In 2026, that wear becomes visible. It doesn't matter how much someone talks, promises, or presents themselves in a certain way. Daily posture begins to speak louder than any speech. For a long time, it was possible to confuse spirituality with appearance, faith with performance, purpose with visibility. That time ends. The masks do not resist when coherence begins to be demanded. What is not true begins to generate immediate internal conflict. This is one of the most delicate moments of the revelation process. When the mask falls, no character remains. What remains is essence, and not everyone is ready to deal with that. Some try to reinforce the appearance, others fall into confusion, others choose to run, but there is no way back to what was before. The divine verdict manifests exactly here, not as condemnation, but as definition. Each person begins to occupy the place that corresponds to what they truly sustain, not to what they claim to believe, but to what they live when no one is watching. The chosen recognize this point because they have already faced the fall of their own masks. They have already been confronted with their incoherences. They have already had to review attitudes, abandon defenses, and accept deep adjustments. That process wasn't comfortable, but it was formative. That's why, when the external masks begin to fall, the chosen do not feel pleasure in it. They do not celebrate another's exposure. They understand the weight of that moment. They know that revelation hurts, but it also sets free. And they know that no one crosses this time without taking responsibility. In 2026, it will no longer be possible to sustain two postures at the same time. It will no longer be possible to speak of truth and live out of convenience. It will no longer be possible to declare faith and act out of fear. The contrast will become evident, and each one will feel it first within themselves. This is the point where destiny begins to be defined, not as something mystical or fatalistic, but as a direct consequence of the choices made. The path becomes clearer, not because everything becomes easy, but because confusion loses space. The chosen do not assume their destiny out of exaltation. They assume it out of maturity. They understand that they can no longer live unconsciously, that each step matters, that each decision builds something, that the time of neutrality is over. When the masks fall, no speech remains. What remains is the path. And in 2026, each person will walk exactly in the direction that corresponds to what they chose to sustain over time. This is the beginning of the true awakening, not an emotional awakening, but an awakening of responsibility. And only those who are willing to live without masks can cross this year with clarity. The divine verdict rarely happens loudly. It doesn't come with public announcements or spectacular signs. It happens in silence, in a firm and inevitable way. In 2026, this verdict manifests as inner alignment or misalignment. Each person feels clearly whether they are at peace with the path they've chosen or if they live in conflict with themselves. This verdict is not imposed. It is a consequence. Time merely reveals the result of what has been sustained inwardly. Those who lived in coherence feel stability, even amidst difficulties. Those who lived in appearances feel instability, even when everything seems fine on the outside. This difference becomes impossible to ignore. Many confuse the divine verdict with punishment, but that is a mistake. It's not about punishment, but about definition. Time defines, consciousness defines. The path narrows not to exclude, but to align. What no longer matches the truth begins to generate immediate discomfort. The chosen recognize this verdict because they have already felt it before. In moments of deep silence, they were confronted with difficult choices. They had to let go of easy paths, of relationships that once seemed safe, of old versions of themselves. That process was training for the present time. In 2026, this verdict expands. There is no more room to sustain a divided life. Those who try to maintain two truths at once feel constant weariness. Consciousness no longer allows complacency. The spirit demands posture. This is the point where many try to negotiate. They try to adjust their speech, change their appearance, soften their actions. But the verdict doesn't respond to external strategies. It responds to essence. What is not true cannot be sustained, no matter how well it is presented. For the chosen, this time does not generate fear. It brings sobriety. They understand that the verdict doesn't come to destroy, but to place each one exactly where they need to be, not by merit, but by alignment. The silence that accompanies this verdict is uncomfortable for those who depend on external validation. But it is liberating for those who have learned to live before God and not before others' opinions. The chosen no longer need to prove anything. They simply walk. 2026 then becomes a year of clear answers, not because everything will be resolved, but because confusion loses strength. The path may be narrow, but it is defined. And that definition brings peace to those who accept living without masks. Assuming one's own destiny does not mean occupying a place of human prominence. This is a common mistake. In 2026, the chosen are not called to stages, but to internal positions of responsibility. The place they assume is not visible, but it is firm. For a long time, spiritual awakening was associated with exposure, constant speaking, the need to teach or convince. That model is wearing out. True awakening manifests in posture, not performance. The chosen understand that living the truth is more powerful than proclaiming it. Assuming one's place means ceasing to compete for space where God has not called. It means no longer seeking recognition for what is a spiritual duty. It means living with integrity even when no one is watching. This is the place the chosen occupy. In 2026, this positioning becomes evident. While many seek visibility to affirm themselves, the chosen become firm in silence. They do not need to explain themselves. They do not need to justify choices that are already clear to their own conscience. This assumed place also involves boundaries. The chosen learn to say no without guilt. They learn to walk away without resentment. They learn to preserve energy without becoming cold. This balance is the result of spiritual maturity, not indifference. Another important aspect is that the chosen no longer try to carry the weight of the world. They understand that each person is responsible for their own path. They serve when called, help when there is direction, but do not sacrifice themselves beyond what is healthy. The time of spiritual exhaustion ends. Assuming one's place also means accepting that not everyone will understand. Some will interpret it as distance, others as excessive change. But the chosen no longer live to be understood. They live to be consistent. In 2026, the place of the chosen is neither above nor below. It is aligned. They walk with sobriety, attentive to what the time requires, without trying to rush steps or control outcomes. Trust in God replaces anxiety. This place is not comfortable in the human sense, but it is stable in the spiritual sense. There is less noise, less confusion, less need for approval. In exchange, there is clarity, direction, and inner peace. The chosen assume their place because they can no longer live otherwise. It is not spiritual ambition. It is faithfulness to what has already been revealed. And when each one occupies the place that corresponds to their essence, time ceases to be a threat and becomes confirmation. In 2026, truth ceases to be something debated and becomes something lived. Not because everyone will choose the truth, but because it will no longer be possible to hide it. Time creates situations in which each person reveals themselves by the way they react, decide, and remain. There is no longer room for comfortable neutrality. Truth becomes inevitable because contradictions begin to generate immediate discomfort. What was once tolerated now weighs. What was once ignored now demands attention. Many people will feel confused not because the world changed too much, but because the distance between what they live and what they claim to believe has become too great. This process does not happen the same way for everyone. For those who lived with coherence, 2026 brings stability, even amid change. For those who lived upholding appearances, it brings weariness. Time doesn't favor speeches. It favors postures. And this manifests practically in daily life. The chosen recognize this movement because they have already gone through this inner confrontation. They've already had to align thought, attitude, and faith. They've experienced the weight of incoherence and chose to adjust it. Therefore, when truth becomes inevitable on a collective level, they don't collapse. They recognize the pattern. Revelation doesn't only happen in large structures or visible relationships. It happens in small choices, in the way people are treated, in the way one deals with their own limits, in the decision to be honest, even when no one is watching. In 2026, these details begin to define paths. Many will try to resist the truth by reinforcing narratives, creating justifications, or shifting blame. But truth does not respond to external effort. It imposes itself by the simple fact of existing. The more it is hidden, the more evident it becomes. For the chosen, this time requires firmness. Not in the sense of rigidity, but of clarity. They learn not to argue with those who don't want to see. They learn not to wear themselves out trying to convince. Truth does not need constant defense. It stands on its own. This is a year in which unresolved choices come at a cost, not as punishment, but as consequence. Time becomes a mirror. Each one sees reflected what they truly built, and that reflection is impossible to ignore. Inevitable truth does not come to humiliate, it comes to align. It separates what is real from what is artificial. And this separation, although uncomfortable for many, is necessary so that something more solid can be established. In 2026, living in truth ceases to be a spiritual option and becomes a practical requirement. Those who accept this walk with more clarity. Those who resist walk in conflict. Time only reveals the result of that choice. True awakening is not a heightened feeling nor a momentary experience. It is ongoing responsibility. In 2026, this becomes evident. Knowing is not enough. Feeling is not enough. Speaking is not enough. What defines awakening is how one lives after revelation. Many confused awakening with emotion, with enthusiasm, or with belonging to a group. That understanding dissolves. Real awakening demands posture. It demands coherence. It demands assuming the consequences of what has been revealed. And that is not always comfortable. The chosen understand that the greater the awareness, the greater the responsibility. Not in the sense of excessive weight, but of constant attentiveness. Every choice starts to have a clear impact on the inner state. the spirit quickly responds when something is out of alignment. This responsibility manifests in simple areas of life, in how one speaks, in how one reacts, in how one deals with conflict. The chosen realize they can no longer act on impulse and justify it afterward. Consciousness no longer allows for that kind of negotiation. In 2026, real awakening also requires boundaries. Knowing when to walk away, when to be silent, when not to get involved. This is not indifference. It is discernment. Not every battle needs to be fought. Not every opinion needs to be expressed. Preserving one's own integrity becomes a priority. Another important aspect is taking responsibility for one's own journey without outsourcing it. The chosen stop blaming the past, people, or circumstances. They understand that from the moment they awaken, they are responsible for upholding what they know to be true. This level of responsibility scares those who still associate spirituality with emotional comfort. But for the chosen, it brings stability. Living consciously is simpler than living divided. Even when there are challenges, there is clarity. Real awakening also redefines service. The chosen don't try to save everyone or carry the world on their shoulders. They serve with discernment, within limits, without self-neglect. Helping is no longer an obligation. It becomes a conscious choice. There comes a point when it is no longer possible to pretend that nothing has changed. 2026 marks exactly that point. Not because the world transforms overnight, but because collective and individual consciousness reaches a limit. Illusion, when sustained for too long, becomes too heavy to continue existing. This is the year when the path is defined, not by external decrees, nor by visible impositions, but by irreversible, internal decisions. Each person begins to walk according to what they chose to sustain, when no one was watching. Time merely confirms those choices. For the chosen ones, 2026 doesn't bring surprise, but confirmation. Everything that was lived behind the scenes, the renunciations, the withdrawals, the silences, the internal corrections, now makes sense. The discomfort that once seemed unexplained is revealed as preparation. The isolation is shown as protection, the loss as adjustment. The divine verdict consolidates here, not as a dramatic judgment, but as a clear consequence. Those who built on truth find a firm foundation. Those who built on appearance find instability. There is no injustice in this process. There is coherence. Time responds exactly to what was planted. In 2026, awakening ceases to be a concept and becomes daily practice. There is no more room to live divided between speech and action. Consciousness no longer allows postponement. What has been revealed demands a response. What has been understood demands action. What has been ignored charges an immediate price. The chosen understand that this is not a year of unchecked expansion, but of consolidation. It's not about achieving more, but about sustaining better. Sustaining the truth, sustaining coherence, sustaining the spiritual responsibility that comes with real awakening. 2026 presents itself as a year of clear definition, not of promises, not of unrealistic expectations, not of comfortable spiritual speeches. It is a year in which what was sustained in silence begins to generate visible results. For the chosen, this is not a surprise. It is a consequence. The time of illusion ends because it is no longer possible to sustain incoherence without cost. What was once tolerated now weighs. What was once disguised now reveals itself, not by forced exposure, but because reality itself begins to demand alignment. The divine verdict manifests precisely there. Each one reaps what was built internally. This is not a year of external judgment, but of internal response. Conscience becomes more active. Choices begin to have immediate impact. There is no more space to live divided between what one claims to believe and what one practices. Superficial spirituality can no longer sustain anyone. For the chosen, 2026 is not a year of fear, but of responsibility. They know they can no longer pretend not to see, not to know, or not to feel. Real awakening demands posture, demands coherence, demands decision. And this applies to every area of life: relationships, work, faith, character. The divine verdict does not separate people by appearance, speech, or social status. It separates by essence, by lived truth, by integrity sustained when no one is watching. Time only makes evident what was already defined within. Illusions fall apart because they have no foundation. Truth comes to the surface because it can no longer be hidden. And the chosen assume their place not out of exaltation, but out of spiritual maturity. They do not seek prominence, they seek alignment. They do not seek approval, they seek faithfulness to what they know is true. This is the kind of year that doesn't allow return to what has already been overcome. Those who try to go back to illusion feel immediate conflict. Those who accept the truth, even with challenges, find stability. The difference is not in the events, but in the posture toward them. Now comment in a direct and objective way. What do you perceive as being revealed at this moment in your life? It may be a truth about yourself, about a relationship, about a path that no longer holds. Don't write long texts, be clear. Name it. The comments help keep this space aligned with those who are truly attentive to this time and allow us to identify which processes are being collectively recognized. 2026 begins now. No masks, no escape, no postponement. Comment.